This happened on a freezing winter night back in 2024, in a small town in Pennsylvania. At the time, I was working the graveyard shift at a 24/7 laundromat, sitting all alone on the edge of town. The place already had an unsettling atmosphere for anyone stuck there by themselves. The only sound was the low, rhythmic hum of old washing machines, mixing with the relentless rain hammering against the large glass windows. It was a total isolation that I never thought I would experience in such a cruel way. To this day, I am still tormented by a lingering regret. Deciding to shrug and cover that night shift on that fateful day was the worst mistake of my life. A mistake that almost cost me my life. My original goal when I started my shift that night was actually very simple. I just needed to clear out a few abandoned laundry baskets, mop up some puddles on the floor, and sit on my phone until morning to clock out. The only reason I was even at the laundromat at that ungodly hour of 2 a.m. was because of Dan. Dan was a close coworker of mine at the shop. He had practically begged me to cover for him because of an urgent family emergency he had to take care of immediately. I didn't think twice and agreed right away, walking Dan to the door so he could head out to the parking lot. Outside, a severe winter storm was starting to unleash itself. The rain was pouring so hard it completely blurred the large front windows, cutting off my view of the outside world. The massive parking lot out back quickly drowned in pitch-black darkness, completely deserted. Then our luck got worse when the laundromat's Wi-Fi suddenly cut out due to the severe weather. Right after that, I looked down at my phone and realized my cell service had dropped to 0, completely gone. Any source of help or communication with the outside world was officially severed from that moment on. I was pushed into a suffocating state of absolute isolation. It was just me, standing alone in the massive, chilly space, surrounded by the flickering fluorescent lights of the laundromat. And right in that heavy silence, strange noises from the maintenance corners in the back began to echo, sending chills down my spine. The clock on the wall crept closer to exactly 3 a.m. The wind chime hanging by the glass door suddenly let out a dry rattle, signaling someone walking in. I startled, looking up to see a man who was shockingly thin and incredibly tall. He wore an oversized, baggy gray hoodie with the hood pulled all the way down to his chin, completely hiding any features of his face. His appearance exuded a chilling mystery and strangeness that made my skin crawl. He didn't look around or say a single word to me, but silently walked straight toward the blind spot at the back of the room. In his hands, he clutched a large bundle of clothes, roughly wrapped in a coarse duffel bag. As he passed the counter, I caught a whiff of a musty smell mixed with an unpleasant foul fluid. I watched him out of the corner of my eye as he stuffed the entire bundle of clothes, stained with dark, patchy streaks, into washing machine number 9 in the darkest corner. He inserted the coins into the machine, pressed the start button, and stood dead still, watching the drum spin its first few rotations. In my mind, logical self-defense mechanisms immediately kicked in to soothe my fear. I told myself that he was probably just a weary worker who had finished a late shift, or a poor homeless guy looking to wash his dirty clothes and escape the storm outside. In this isolated town, encountering people with strange behavior at night wasn't exactly uncommon. You're being paranoid, just ignore him and keep doing your job. I decided to look down, pretending to focus on the shift logbook on the desk, to avoid drawing any attention or trouble with this bizarre customer. But that artificial peace didn't last long. The rustling sound of his footsteps dragging across the tiled floor suddenly moved closer to the cashier counter. I jumped when he didn't choose to wait in the row of chairs next to the washing machines like other customers. Instead, he walked straight to the plastic chairs directly facing my counter and plopped down. The distance between him and me was now separated by only a small aisle. He sat as still as a statue, both hands shoved deep into his hoodie pockets. But his gaunt legs began to tap continuously against the floor. The thudding sound of his soles hitting the tiles echoed mechanically, steadily, and coldly through the quiet space. It sounded like the countdown of a ticking time bomb. Then, a new detail emerged that completely shattered my previous logical excuses. Like clockwork, about once every 2 minutes, his hood-covered head would twitch and look up. From deep within the pitch-black opening of that hood, I clearly felt a crazed gaze staring intently at me, full of scrutiny. This lurking behavior repeated deliberately with an increasingly heavy frequency. It made me realize that the tiny safe space behind my cashier counter was being brutally suffocated. I tried to glue my eyes to the computer screen, pretending to be busy checking the accounting records. But my entire body was frozen stiff with fear. The psychological pressure weighed so heavily that cold sweat began to pour down my spine, soaking the t-shirt I was wearing under the silent, threatening gaze of the stranger. The sound of washing machine number 9, suddenly shifting into the drain cycle, caught my attention. I looked toward the glass drum in the dark corner and felt my heart tighten. The water inside was no longer a murky, soapy color. It was streaked with deep pink before quickly turning into a thick, blood-like red. Before I could even process what I was looking at, the darkness opposite me suddenly moved. The man in the hoodies stood straight up. He began taking slow, heavy steps, walking straight toward my cashier counter. The only exit behind the counter was a side door leading to the back room, but it was locked tight. I was cornered, forced to stand frozen in place, to face him directly from less than a meter away. He didn't say a single word, only slowly pulling one hand out of his jacket pocket. He pushed a $50 bill toward me, stained with damp fluid and reeking of a pungent, metallic smell. From deep within the dark shadow of the hood, I could feel 2 aggressive eyes pinning me down without blinking. I could even hear his menacing, wheezing breath through the fabric. "You need to stay calm, give him his change, and he'll leave." I whispered to myself in my head, a way to keep my hands from shaking as I picked up the fluid-stained bill. I opened the drawer to get his change, my entire body going cold as I realized my final boundary of safety had been completely violated. Suddenly, a long, dry beeping sound pierced through the suffocating atmosphere. Washing machine number 9 had finished its cycle. The hoodie guy startled, then spun around and headed back toward the dark corner. He didn't bother putting the clothes in the dryer, but aggressively shoved the soaking wet pile back into his original duffel bag. Right before stepping out the door, he suddenly stopped and turned his head to look straight at my counter. Under the flickering fluorescent lights, I saw a twisted smile showing underneath the shadow of his hood. He rushed out into the pitch-black rain and vanished into the darkness of the parking lot out back. My survival instinct instantly kicked in like a tightly coiled spring. I bolted straight for the front door as fast as I could. I used all my strength to latch and lock the 2 tempered glass doors, pulling down all the metal shutters. I locked every single entrance in utter panic, almost dropping the entire ring of keys in the process. Looking through the foggy glass pane, I knew the man was gone, but the terror remained. I realized I was completely trapped. Outside, the severe storm and heavy rain poured down relentlessly, blocking the town's roads. My phone still didn't have a single bar of service to call the police or anyone for help. The remaining 4 hours of that shift felt like an entire century to me. I sat huddled in the corner of the cashier counter, in the highest defensive posture, my hand tightly gripping a homemade iron rod used to pry open washing machine lids. I strained my ears to catch the slightest sound of the wind howling outside the glass and the low rumble of the machines. My story had now completely shifted into a silent survival mode in the dark. The next afternoon, I returned to the laundromat to start my shift as usual. As soon as I walked through the door, I was stunned when the manager informed me that Dan hadn't shown up for work today. His phone was completely unreachable, and his family was frantically searching for him everywhere. I had to suppress my anxiety to cover Dan's shift, feeling an overwhelming, vague sense of dread. But less than an hour into the shift, police sirens suddenly wailed loudly, tearing through the silence of the street. 3 detective patrol cars pulled straight into the parking lot and quickly cordoned off the entire laundromat. Several grim-faced investigators immediately approached my cashier counter. They fired a barrage of questions at me about every event and the identity of anyone who had logged into the shop the night before. "Did you see anyone bringing a large duffel bag in here last night?" Trembling, I recounted the entire incident about the man in the hoodie washing clothes at machine number 9. Right then, the lead detective looked at me with a heavy gaze and officially delivered a devastating piece of news. Dan's body had just been found beneath a frozen river a few miles outside of town. He had been brutally murdered with multiple fatal knife wounds for his money and personal belongings. My ears rang, and I had to grip the edge of the counter to keep from collapsing onto the floor. In the hours that followed, I tried to delude myself and cling to the most logical explanation I could find. I told myself that Dan might have been randomly attacked by some criminal at a gas station along the way while driving home. It had to be a random roadside robbery homicide that had absolutely nothing to do with this laundromat, but the brutal reality slapped me dead in the face just 3 days later. The police detective returned to the laundromat and quietly pushed a suspect identification photo toward me. He had just died of a drug overdose at an abandoned house on the northern edge of town. A devastating piece of physical evidence emerged, completely shattering all my previous selfish, comforting theories. The man in the morgue photo was the exact same gaunt guy in the hoodie who had sat opposite me, staring intently that night. The police said he was a severe addict who had been covertly stalking the laundromat employees' schedules for weeks. On that fateful night, he had ambushed and brutally murdered Dan in the dark corner of the parking lot out back. The homicide happened less than 15 minutes before I walked in to take over the shift. He killed Dan, stole his wallet along with all his belongings for drug money, and then dragged the body to dump it into the river. The horrifying truth exposed all the fake coincidences I had been hoping for. The large bundle of clothes stained with dark, patchy streaks that he stuffed into washing machine number 9 that night was Dan's blood-soaked clothing. The cold-blooded killer had nonchalantly walked into the shop to use our very own washing machine to destroy the victim's bloodstains right after committing the crime. The case was eventually closed legally because the perpetrator was dead. But for me, everything was just the beginning of a nightmare that would drag on for years. The horrifying event of that night left me with severe post-traumatic stress disorder. I submitted my resignation that very week and swore I would never step foot inside that laundromat or that dark parking lot ever again. For months, I couldn't sleep for more than 2 hours a night unless I turned on every single light in my room. Over time, the initial fear gnawed at me, morphing into a morbid obsession that took over my life. Now, just seeing anyone wearing a baggy hoodie walking toward me on the street is enough to make my heart race and my entire body shake. I completely lost the ability to step into any enclosed space at night if there wasn't a crowd around. I spent countless sleepless nights retracing every fragment of memory, trying to make sense of it all. I wondered how long that killer had been lurking in the shadows behind the tree line, tracking our shift schedules before deciding to strike. He had stood there, watching Dan beg me to cover for him, and then quietly stalked him out to the dark corner of the parking lot to end his life so brutally. The police provided clear answers for everything, allowing me to try and get my life back on track. Yet, there was one detail, a dark, unexplainable paradox that always clung to my mind like a ghost refusing to fade. It is the question that has tortured me for years whenever darkness falls. On that fateful night, when the cold-blooded killer sat silently on the plastic chair opposite me and kept glancing at me through the pitch-black opening of his hood. What was he actually thinking during that entire hour he sat facing me? Was he just patiently waiting for his victim's blood-soaked clothes to finish washing so he could leave quietly without drawing attention? Or, during those suffocating silences between the low hum of the machines, was the crazed mind of an addict locked in a violent mental struggle? Was he considering whether to walk up to the counter to turn me into his second victim, just to silence the only witness and wipe away all traces inside that deserted laundromat? Every time I think about how I was in the same room with a guy who had just murdered someone, and how I was just one impulsive decision away from death, my skin crawls. And the answer to that truth will forever sink deep into the darkness, along with the death of the killer, leaving me with a lingering anxiety that will last until the very end of my days. This happened just this past winter, right before the Christmas holidays, in a high-rise apartment building in downtown Chicago. I'm not sharing this story online for clout or to scare anyone, because this was a completely real, terrifying experience that happened to me. I'll try to keep my voice as calm and detached as possible, but honestly, just looking back at every single detail of that night still makes my palms sweat cold. What you're about to hear doesn't involve any demons, ghosts, or supernatural entities. The only thing existing throughout this story is the sheer, sick depravity of a human being, hidden inside a suffocating and isolated urban space. At the time, I had just rented a small studio apartment on the 22nd floor of an old high-rise building. The rent was pretty cheap, partly because it was located right above the loading dock area, where massive delivery trucks backed in. It was a very late Sunday night, and the clock on the wall was already pointing to almost 11:45 p.m. My new place was still cluttered with cardboard boxes, Amazon packages, and a few unboxed pieces of self-assembly IKEA furniture. According to the strict rules of the building management, residents were required to bring these bulky piles of cardboard down to the central trash room, located in basement B2, ourselves. We had to use the freight elevator instead of throwing them directly into the small trash chutes on each floor to avoid clogging the vertical disposal pipe. I was completely relaxed at the time, without a single care or suspicion of danger. I was wearing headphones, listening to some light music, feeling quietly excited that I was finally finishing up cleaning my new home after days of exhaustion. I had walked down this hallway and used the freight elevator a few times during my first week moving in. Because of that, I was totally confident that I knew the basic layout and the walkways of that dark basement by heart. When I stepped out of the freight elevator in basement B2, a blast of freezing air immediately hit the back of my neck. The pungent smell of industrial trash mixed with the characteristic dampness of concrete basements overwhelmed my senses. The heavy, thick iron door leading into the central trash room was usually propped open with a large wooden wedge at the bottom, but tonight that door had been completely shut for God knows how long. The hum of the heavy-duty exhaust fans and the low droning of the central trash chute system running all the way down from the roof echoed heavily. It created a rhythmic rumbling sound, like a magnified heartbeat in this isolated space. At the time, I just figured it was a draft from the loading dock, or maybe a janitor had accidentally kicked the wooden wedge away. I didn't have a single negative thought or worry in my head. I walked inside and neatly threw the pile of cardboard boxes into a corner of the trash room. Once I was done, I turned back and grabbed the metal handle of the iron door to head back out to the elevator lobby. But when I pushed hard against it, the door didn't budge even a single millimeter. The horizontal metal latch on the outside of the door seemed to have dropped down. I suddenly remembered a dry, metallic click echoing a few minutes prior, right when I had first walked into the room. Back then, I had carelessly assumed it was just the normal mechanical shifting of the building's pipes. I quickly pulled my phone out of my pocket to call management, or the building's on-duty security. But to my shock, the top corner of the screen displayed the words, "No service." The thick reinforced concrete walls down in basement B2 had completely cut off my cell signal. I still tried to maintain my logical reasoning and reassured myself that this was just a stupid accident. I thought maybe the night guard on patrol had passed by and accidentally locked the door from the outside, not knowing someone was inside. He'll definitely come back to open the door in a bit. I muttered to myself in the dark space to break the silence, but my belief in a normal evening began to shatter violently. The biting cold of the basement started to seep deep through my thin jacket, making my entire body shiver uncontrollably. Amidst the suffocating silence of the trash room, a strange noise suddenly rang out. It was a sharp, ear-piercing metallic scraping coming from inside the iron trash chute right next to where I stood. That sound was definitely not the freefall of household trash or the normal clinking of bottles. It was the sound of metal being deliberately scratched by fingernails or some sharp object, slow but steady. That chilling sound was moving, creeping closer from high up the chute down toward this basement. My survival instinct immediately kicked in, making my heart race uncontrollably in my chest. I ripped my headphones off, holding my breath to focus my entire hearing on the source of that noise. My stress levels were pushed to the absolute limit when the scratching abruptly stopped for a few brief seconds. Right after that, a choked, wheezing, and heavy gasping for air began to echo through the thick iron pipe. In a panic, I rushed over to the iron door, slamming both hands repeatedly against the freezing metal surface. I screamed for help with everything I had left, hoping someone passing through the hallway might hear me. But my screams were completely swallowed by the dense, soundproof concrete walls of basement B2. There was no more time for me to analyze or hesitate for even another second. The noise inside the trash chute suddenly accelerated at a terrifying pace, creating a sequence of thumping sounds. Something very heavy was sliding straight down the pipe at a breakneck speed, heading right toward the discharge opening. I couldn't identify what was lurking inside that dark and narrow chute. It could be a creep, a dangerous intruder, or a deadly threat rushing toward me. This trash room was a dead end, and there was absolutely no other emergency exit for me to escape through. I was cornered, my entire body frozen, forced to stare blankly at the wide-open mouth of the trash chute right in front of me. The feeling of becoming a hunted prey inside a sealed trap completely paralyzed any of my normal thoughts. A heavy thud suddenly slammed straight down onto the concrete floor, right in front of my eyes. The object dropped out from the central trash chute itself, kicking up dust and the surrounding musty air into the space. It was a massive, pitch-black industrial trash bag. It was wrapped tightly in dozens of layers of gray duct tape in a violent, sloppy yet deeply sick manner. The fall from the high floor was so violent that it ripped a long tear in the trash bag from the inside. But what spilled out was absolutely not household garbage or normal discarded items. Hundreds of small, glossy photos scattered everywhere, completely covering a patch of the gray concrete floor. Under the flickering fluorescent light and the low drone of the basement room, I tremblingly knelt down to take a closer look. My entire body instantly froze solid when I realized a horrifying truth. Every single one of those photos was of me. They were straight-on angles taken from the windows of the brick building opposite ours, peering through the gaps in my room's curtains. Photos of me sleeping soundly in bed, photos of me standing and cooking in the kitchen. There were even photos of me stepping out of the bathroom. This stalking had been going on continuously for the past 6 months, from my old apartment all the way to this newly moved-in one. Before I could even process that disgusting and perverted reality, a dry metallic screech suddenly rang out right above my head. The spring-loaded iron lid of the trash chute opening was slowly being pushed upward from the inside at a very agonizing pace. 2 gaunt, ash-gray hands covered in bloody scratches gripped the edge of the iron pipe tightly. He was using his full arm strength to pull his weight through and slowly crawl downward. Out of the deep, foul-smelling darkness of the pipe, a hollow human face emerged. He had wide, bloodshot eyes with rolled-back pupils that didn't blink even once, staring intently down at me with a twisted, deformed grin. "Found you." His raspy voice, sounding like wind wheezing through teeth, made the blood in my veins turn to ice. This was absolutely not a random coincidence or some terrible misunderstanding. This sick stalker had been secretly living and moving inside the building's trash chute system to watch me day after day. Right at that fateful moment, just as that hideous face was about to haul itself out of the chute, a loud clattering echoed from the iron door. The horizontal latch on the outside was suddenly yanked open by the building's night guard, who had heard my desperate slamming and screaming. The second the door cracked open, I used every ounce of my strength to burst out like a maniac. I ran for my life down the dark hallway, screaming continuously for help and grabbing onto the guard's shoulders in absolute panic. The Chicago Police Department was notified and arrived at the scene just 15 minutes later. They quickly locked down the entire building, shut off the automated trash system, and began scouring every single corner from basement B2 all the way up to the roof. The search exposed a reality that made everyone present that night completely freeze in horror. Right inside a large ventilation shaft connected to the trash chute, on the floor directly above my studio apartment, police discovered a highly sophisticated makeshift shelter. Inside that cramped, foul-smelling lair, they recovered a filthy mini sleeping pad, dozens of half-eaten canned food tins, and a large telephoto camera lens. That creep had been secretly living right next to my walls for weeks without anyone ever knowing. However, the man with the twisted smile wasn't caught at the scene. He had already managed to escape through a subterranean technical hatch leading straight into the city's sewer system, which connected directly to an abandoned subway station 2 blocks away. He slipped away before the police force could even tighten their perimeter around the building. The very next morning, I willingly forfeited my entire 3-month rent deposit just to pack up my belongings and flee that godforsaken place. I immediately moved back in with my parents to a small house in a safe, sparsely populated suburb. To this day, the true identity of that sick stalker remains a massive question mark for investigators. My case file is still open and sitting in an unresolved archive because the police couldn't find a single matching fingerprint in the national database. At my parents' new house, I spent a lot of money installing a strict 3-layer security system, including night vision cameras and motion sensors at every entrance. But that mechanical safety does absolutely nothing to heal the psychological wounds inside me. Severe paranoia and a crippling fear of the dark have embedded themselves deep within my veins. Now, every time night falls, Just hearing a tiny rattling from the water pipes or the low hum of a vent fan instantly freezes my entire body. I'll hold my breath, lie perfectly still in bed, and listen in absolute terror, thinking he has come back. But the scariest, most haunting part of this entire ordeal lies in a detail the police revealed to me a few weeks later. When they thoroughly examined the camera memory cards left behind in the ventilation shaft, they discovered a few photos taken at extremely close range. The angle of those pictures was from the darkness of the 22nd floor hallway itself, right behind my back as I stood waiting for the freight elevator to bring the cardboard boxes down. The timestamp displayed on the photos was exactly 15 minutes before I stepped down into basement B2. This meant he had been standing right behind me in the shadows, quietly watching me, right before he slipped into the trash chute to wait for me at the bottom. That person is still out there right now, completely free, lurking somewhere in the suffocating concrete structure of some major city. I can never know if tonight, while I'm lying in this secure room, he is standing hidden in the dark outside the yard, watching me through the gap in the window curtains. This is a completely true story that happened to me and my best friend Chris about 3 years ago. To this day, I still get chills whenever I look back at that final moment of peace inside our SUV before everything went sideways. The vibe in the car was pretty laid back at first, with some low music playing and snacks scattered around to help us stay awake on the road. Neither Chris nor I were rookies when it came to long-distance driving. Having done plenty of grueling road trips across state lines before, we knew exactly how to handle car trouble in the middle of nowhere, from swapping out a flat tire in total darkness to pacing ourselves through hours of non-stop driving. So, you can take my word for it that we weren't just a couple of paranoid idiots getting spooked by the wind or some harmless shadows along the highway. Our ride was a full-sized, high-clearance SUV equipped with heavy-duty automatic locks and excellent soundproofing. Outside, we were rolling down Interstate 90, cutting right through the desolate Montana plains dead in the middle of the night. A massive blanket of thick fog began rolling in, swallowing the highway whole as the heavy darkness cut down our headlights to almost nothing. Viswizard dropped to less than 30 feet ahead of our bumper, leaving us completely blinded and cut off from the rest of the world. Our original goal was completely ordinary, just trying to push straight through to Minnesota to make it in time for Chris's sister's graduation the next morning. The dashboard clock read exactly 3 a.m. when a sudden wave of intense exhaustion forced me to pull over at an abandoned rest stop. Chris quickly drifted off in the passenger seat, while I cut the engine to save gas and closed my eyes to rest in the silence. The surrounding area was completely deserted, and not a single streetlight was working. A very faint metallic click suddenly broke the quiet air from somewhere right outside the car door. At first I tried to tell myself that it was just the engine radiator cooling down or the wind brushing against the frame. The strange noise happened again, much clearer this time. That sharp sound made Chris bolt awake. Both of us locked eyes in absolute silence, confirming that the noise was definitely real. The dry clicking sound continued at a steady pace, slowly moving from the driver's side door toward the back. To our horror, we realized it was the sound of someone trying to lift each door handle of the SUV, doing it incredibly gently. I reached out to roll down the window to shout outside, but Chris grabbed my arm just in time, shaking his head to signal that we had to stay absolutely quiet. "Don't do that," he whispered, his voice trembling. There was no sound of footsteps on the gravel, nor any voice calling out, leaving the area around the rest stop terrifyingly still. The rhythm of the rattling handles remained steady and slow, creating an invisible, suffocating psychological pressure inside the cabin. This anomaly wasn't accompanied by any glass smashing or attempts to force the door open. It felt like a chillingly patient act of a creep stalking us from the dark. I felt my chest tighten as cold sweat began to pour down my spine. Unable to take the mental torture of that steady clicking anymore, I decided I had to act. I twisted the ignition switch and hit the high beams to cut through the darkness. The bright yellow beams tore through the thick fog and shined directly onto a motionless figure. It was a lanky man standing dead still right in front of our bumper, just a few feet from the windshield. He stood there in an unnaturally contorted posture like a tattered scarecrow in the dead of winter. He flashed a grotesque, bone-chilling grin that stretched from ear to ear. His unblinking eyes were wide open, staring straight through the glass and locking onto the two of us. Slowly, he raised his arm up to his face, deliberately revealing an object held in his palm. It was a keychain with a highly distinct red plastic bear head charm hanging from it. My entire body froze instantly as that terrifying piece of evidence came into clear view under the bright headlights. To my absolute horror, I recognized it as my spare house keys, the exact ones that had gone missing at a gas station 2 states back. The creep standing out there wasn't some stranger randomly passing by. He had been tracking us for a very long time. The man slowly took a step back into the shadows behind the front of the car. Within a few short seconds, his silhouette vanished completely into the heavy fog, leaving both of us utterly stunned. "Go, start the engine, and get us the hell out of here right now." Chris screamed at the top of his lungs in pure panic, slamming his hand against the dashboard. His screaming snapped me out of my sheer shock and forced me to focus on escaping. Shaking all over, I slammed on the clutch, threw it into gear, and stomped on the gas pedal like crazy. The tires screeched violently against the gravel of the abandoned rest stop. The SUV tore out of the lot and sped straight back onto Interstate 90. The fog outside was swirling tighter now, thickening up like a solid white wall. Visibility was severely limited, making high-speed driving incredibly dangerous for our high-clearance vehicle. But the fear of that stalker completely overrode my common sense at that moment. Even after we had covered a significant distance, I still felt an invisible heavy pressure tailing us. Both of us kept straining our eyes at the rearview mirror, searching for any sign of a pursuit through the night mist. Any attempt to rationalize what just happened with everyday logic completely evaporated. Our minds had only one single goal left, which was to reach light and people to find safety. After nearly 40 minutes of driving like hell in pure terror, we finally spotted the bright lights of a massive 24-hour truck stop along the highway. The place was huge, with a few semi-trucks parked around and high-voltage stadium lights making the whole area as bright as day. I pulled the car right up to a gas pump and noticed the fog had started to thin out, making it much easier to see our surroundings. Looking through the windows at the space behind us, everything was completely empty, and there wasn't a single car tailing us. Karis let out a massive sigh of relief, opened his door, and hopped out to grab 2 hot coffees inside the convenience store to calm our shattered nerves. As I walked around to the back to check the car's body, I suddenly froze dead in my tracks when I saw a fresh smear of mud running right along the tailgate. Even more terrifyingly, the glass window of the very back cargo area was fogged up, with distinct finger scratch marks smeared across it from the inside. I yelled to stop Chris just as he was walking out of the convenience store. I pointed at the rear of the vehicle and told him that something was seriously wrong right inside the back cargo space. Chris fiercely objected, the color completely draining from his face. "Get in the car, I'm begging you. Let's just keep driving and don't check anything out of curiosity," he pleaded with a terrified, shaking voice. But curiosity overrode my fear, and I decided to hit the button to unlock all the doors. I stepped closer and flung the tailgate wide open. When I flipped up the trunk floor mat to check the deep, spare tire well underneath, both of us nearly fainted from pure horror. The man from earlier wasn't there anymore. But inside that cramped tire well lay a thin blanket along with a pile of freshly opened, half-eaten food cans. Right in the dead center of the tire well, my spare keys with the red bearhead charm were sitting neatly. Next to the keychain was a crumpled piece of handwritten paper. The note was written in black ink, containing just one short, blunt sentence. "Thanks for the ride these past 2 days." The two of us immediately slammed the tailgate shut, dashed straight into the cabin, and sped away from that truck stop without ever looking back. I stomped on the gas pedal all the way, flying recklessly into the darkness of the highway, leaving behind the high-voltage lights and the sheer terror we had just uncovered. There was absolutely no direct, violent confrontation between us and that mysterious creep throughout the long night. He didn't rush out to attack us, didn't chase us with a knife, and didn't utter any direct threats at all. But it was his silence and his vanishing without a trace that completely consumed our minds. Our ultimate terror stemmed from realizing that he had shared a cramped space with the two of us across hundreds of miles. For 2 whole days, Chris and I ate, slept, talked, sang, and shared private stories in the car, completely unaware that a pair of eyes was lying right beneath our backs, listening to everything in the pitch blackness of the spare tire well. The fear of what could have happened if he had made a move while we were fast asleep along the road made my hair stand on end. For months after that harrowing trip, Chris and I were constantly haunted by rustling sounds whenever we sat in a car alone. Any tiny noise from the back seat, the friction of luggage, or the wind whistling through a window crack was enough to make my heart shoot right out of my chest. We tried to sit down together to come up with logical theories to find some peace of mind. Chris figured he had slipped in from a gas station back in Washington when the two of us got out to use the restroom and buy food 2 days prior. But every logical theory we came up with was quickly shot down. That storage compartment under the car floor was incredibly cramped and suffocating, to the point where even a grown adult would have trouble curling up in it. How could a flesh and blood man endure hiding there for 2 consecutive days and nights without making a single peep? Not a cough, not a turn. And even more terrifying was the question of how he managed to crawl out at that desolate rest stop without us noticing at all. When I cut the engine to rest, he was lying right underneath the trunk floor, just a thin mat away from me. And then, the most chilling detail surfaced, making my blood run completely cold every single time I think about it. The clicking sound of the door handle that Chris and I heard at 3 a.m. wasn't the sound of him trying to break into the car from the outside. It was the sound of him lying in the tire well in the back, reaching up and trying to turn the door handle from the inside to find a way out after 2 days of being trapped. He had managed to open the tailgate from the inside, quietly stepped out into the fog, walked around to the front of the car to taunt us with the keys in his hand before vanishing into the night. To this very day, my brain still cannot find any fully convincing explanation for this bizarre incident. I traded in that SUV right after the trip, and I've never dared to buy any car with an underfloor storage compartment ever again. To this day, I still have to accept living with the fact that I will never know the true identity of that terrifying man. Who he was, why he got a hold of my house keys, and just how long he had been tracking me. Maybe he is still out there somewhere, continuing to hide under the bed or in the trunk of some next unlucky victim, quietly whispering a thank you for a free ride.